Hey, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. It's episode 273, and this week we're going to look at 6 things that your letting agent may not be telling you. I promise you that everyone who listens to this podcast at some point will be astonished at what they're going to hear today.
Yes, welcome to the Property Podcast, where every week property investors come together to be informed and inspired. Now, by listening to this podcast, you are, of course, a fine, upstanding individual. But it will not surprise you in the slightest to hear that not everybody in the property industry is the same. We've talked about sharks in the property industry in the past, and one area where lots of those sharks are swimming are in letting agency. The right agent can make your investing life a breeze. The wrong one can cause you all manner of trouble. Today we're going to open your eyes to some very dodgy practices, and we're going to help you to avoid them. Okay, our news story this week comes from Property Wire, and it's going to help us put to bed a really prominent property myth. So the headline is, the value of flats have increased the most in the UK over the last 5 years, by which it means have increased more than houses. And it goes on to say that over the last 5 years, flats have increased in value by 48% compared to 39% for all properties as a whole. So everybody comes out ahead, but flats have done better.
They certainly have, and there's probably reason behind that. Where do flats get built right now? Well, they get built in city centres, and during this part of the cycle, cities and city centres are doing better. The data shows us that, and because apartments tend to be built in city centres, they are doing really well. Also, another point to bear in mind is that outside of city centres, not many developers are building apartments. So there's that lack of supply as well, because they haven't got the confidence. Still, even at this stage of the cycle, they haven't got the confidence. You see housing developments outside the city centres, but you rarely see apartments. Think about it. For all the developments you may have seen on Rightmove or local to you, you don't see many apartments if they're outside a city centre. So for those two reasons combined, city centres doing well from capital growth point of view, and that's where apartments are built, and a lack of supply outside of city centres means that apartments have won overall. So it makes sense. What doesn't make sense is the irrational views that are just spouted around the property industry and are treated as gospel. So the amount of times I've heard, oh, houses are best, and left at that, or don't invest in apartments, they don't make as much money, they don't grow as much in capital value. Well, it's all rubbish. It seems that it's one of these opinions, and there are a few in property, where someone says something, believes it to be true, someone listens to it, accepts it without digging into it at all, and before you know it, huge proportions of the property industry or landlords believe something that's actually false. And if you're one of those people, don't feel bad, because there's people who are deemed as experts who have got a platform, not us, I'm pleased to say, but other people who've got a platform that I've witnessed say, oh no, houses are best, you must always invest in houses. These are the same people, by the way, who said never invest in the north. Many of these people as well are the same people who said never invest in the north, only the south gets capital growth. Yeah, remember that one? That was said too. So the point here is twofold. One, what's best? Well, actually both. Have a mix in your portfolio. Rob and I do. There is no best. There is maybe a best one right now in the cycle, but there is no best overall. And two, just because somebody sounds confident about the information they're giving you doesn't mean it's true. So be careful, and be careful of what Rob and I say as well. What we've presented you today is a news story of facts and figures, not our opinions. Our opinion is balance. But if you hear a very strong opinion in property, that's when you want to be more cautious, because the stronger the opinion is when certainly I'm less likely to trust it. So by all means, accept advice and information from others gratefully, but don't necessarily believe it straight away. Do your own research and come to your own conclusions.
Bonus Rob B rant there. I like that. Alright, so today is the first Thursday in June. Why is it significant that it's the first Thursday? Because we have meetups on the first Thursday of the month, don't we? We have over 35 of them all over the country and beyond. If you're heading along to one, have a great time. If you're not booked onto one yet, go to thepropertyhub.net/meetups, find your nearest and get along. It's free and you'll have a great time. Also, Rob, worth mentioning quickly that last week we had our apprentice episode, and you spent a lot of time this week going through applications. It seems like there's some really good ones in there.
Some really good ones. I'm really, really happy. So thank you so much to everyone who's applied so far. We won't be able to put you all through, obviously. That's kind of how this process works. But the quality of the applications from pretty much everybody has been absolutely top-notch. So thank you. It's been a pleasure reviewing them all. There's still time if you want to get involved and get your application in. Go to thepropertyhub.net/apprentice to get your application in. And if you have no idea what we're talking about, go and listen to last week's episode and you will become enlightened. But really excited about this role, really excited about working with this person and the team working with this person. And of course, we'll share the journey of some of these applicants on the way to one of them landing the apprentice role in the podcast in the next few weeks. So stay tuned.
Okay, so today we're talking about 6 things your letting agent isn't telling you. The inspiration for this topic came from an article that we saw at the Landlord Law blog. You'll find that at landlordlawblog.co.uk. Tessa Shepperson there does a great job, well worth checking out her work. And we thought that it was worth highlighting on the podcast because getting the right letting agent in place is so important for your investments. Buying the right property in the first place, obviously, is critical. But then you've got to manage that asset properly to keep the rent coming in and to make sure that its value is preserved. The agent that you choose can be the difference between having a really easy investment that puts money in your pocket and you don't have to think about it too much, or being an absolute nightmare that costs you money and causes you stress. Now, a good agent does a lot for you. They are the buffer between you and your tenants. They make sure that your place gets tenanted quickly by good tenants. They make sure these tenants pay their rent, which is pretty important. Make sure they pay it on time. And when repairs need doing, they make sure that they're carried out promptly, competently by tradespeople who are qualified. At least that's what they're meant to do. The trouble is that you're taking your property that could be worth hundreds of thousands of pounds with loads of your own money tied up in it, and you're handing it over to someone who, in most cases, you don't know a lot about, who has really massive responsibility. So when you're choosing an agent, there's a lot to think about, and there's a lot more to think about than just who's offering the cheapest fees.
Now, Rob and I have been running Yellow Lettings for a number of years, and in that time, we've seen a lot, both from tenants and landlords alike. Before Yellow, we were really frustrated by working with some poor agents. And we've worked with some good ones too, but it's those less than stellar agents that inspired us to start our own agency, so we could get the service delivered that we always wanted. And it's through those experiences that we feel hopefully more than qualified to talk on this subject. So, does your letting agent have your best interest at heart? Sometimes, and sometimes not so much. Here are 6 things your letting agent may not be telling you.
The first thing they might not be telling you is that they have no qualifications in letting agency at all. At the moment, there is no requirement to have any kind of qualifications. You have to be the member of a redress scheme, and that is about it. Other than that, anyone can set up a letting agency, and anyone sometimes pretty much does. If you've been in and around property for now, that's probably just something that you're used to and you take for granted. But if you're newer, then you might be shocked by that. You might just assume that letting agents need to have qualifications. They deal with some of your biggest assets, they deal with people's homes, and they don't necessarily have any qualifications in doing that. Some agencies, of course, train their staff well, but there's no recognised qualification that agents need in order to trade. Now, there are plans to regulate the letting agency sector. Government's been talking about it a lot recently. There's been all kinds of consultations and reviews, and I've sort of lost track of where it's all up to. So it seems like this will get addressed at some point, but goodness knows exactly when that's going to come into force. And until it does, literally anyone can just set up shop as a letting agent.
So it looks like the government's going to cover this off at some point. But they really need to, and we would like to see all letting agents have this as a bare minimum. So you know that your letting agency is practicing as they should, is protecting you as they should, and there's some sort of redress scheme there as well, should things go wrong. So fingers crossed that plays out. Rob, confusingly, there's more than one body that you can be under as a letting agent, and again, that may change. But for now, you have to be aware of a few different ones.
Yeah, so letting agents could be a member of ARLA, they could be members of RICS, or they could be members of NALS. So 3 to choose from, or none at all, of course. They could be members of none, and that's at the moment fine too. So to go some way to checking that your letting agent is qualified and knows what they're doing, look for membership of one of those 3 schemes. Out of the 3, I would choose ARLA. ARLA, I believe, has the most stringent requirements of the 3. I've done the ARLA exams. They're pretty comprehensive. It's certainly not something you can just bluff your way through. So if an agency is an ARLA member, and you can go and check on the ARLA website to make sure that they're just not sneakily using the logo when they shouldn't be, that means that at least someone in that agency has taken the qualification, not necessarily everyone. And also, to remain an ARLA member, you have to demonstrate that you are sticking to their code of practice around certain essential parts of the job. So that gives you some comfort as well. And that leads us nicely into the second thing that your agent might not be telling you.
And that is, they might be spending your money. Yes, your ears are not deceiving you. They could be spending your money. So this is a big one. It's an exercise in trust. Agents hold thousands of pounds of other people's money. They can keep it wherever they like, and there's no way you can check on it. Scary, isn't it? Is it in a protected account, the agency's own company account, or dare we suggest, an individual's account? Now, with many letting agents, you have no idea. There are plans to introduce a mandatory client money protection insurance for letting agents, but like with our last point, there's no fixed date yet. The earliest it could be is 2019. But it's hard to believe that in 2018, as we record this podcast, this still can take place.
And this isn't just in theory, agents could spend your money on themselves. It happens. It happens all the time. There are so many agents who've got in trouble for spending clients' money. So whether that's tenants' deposits that they're keeping hold of, or whether it's rent that they've collected and are not passing on, it's a regular occurrence to hear about agents who've burned through tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds and are not able to give it back. So it could be that they're just straight out scammers and they've got it spent it all on themselves and living the high life. Or it could just be that they've got into trouble, the business is struggling, they have not been able to pay their bills, so they've dipped into the client account, planning to pay it back, but then got themselves into more and more trouble. You can see how it happens, but it shouldn't be able to happen. That money should absolutely be held in a separate ring-fenced account, and there's no way that agents should be able to spend that on themselves. And if they do, there should be some kind of redress. So what can you do? Once mandatory client money protection comes in, then it's something you won't have to worry about so much. But in the meantime, check that your agent is signed up to a money protection scheme, so your money is insured against misappropriation. It's another good reason to make sure that your agent is a member of ALA, because that is a condition of membership. ALA also has requirements around how money is held, so it must be in a designated client account completely separate from the business's funds, and it has to be audited regularly so they know that they've got the right amount of money and they know what belongs to whom. So it seems silly that it's the kind of thing that you as the client should have to think about, but at the moment you do. So ask those questions and give yourself the certainty that your money is where it should be.
So third on our list is tenant referencing. So this is a really tricky one, because your agent says they found a great tenant, but it doesn't actually mean they found you a great tenant. Now, because of this, there have been horror stories where agents have put in really, really bad tenants into properties just so they can get their fees.
And that's particularly the case if they're operating a let-only service. So all they're doing is finding the tenant, because at that point they get to take their money, and if the tenant starts causing trouble, well, that's not their problem. If they're managing the property, you'd hope that they'd be a little bit more careful, because any fallout is going to be theirs. Not necessarily the case though, and it is of course you that's going to be picking up the tab in terms of lost rent and legal bills and damage and so on if things go wrong. So the answer to this is referencing. Referencing, of course, doesn't protect you completely. You can have a tenant that references brilliantly, but turns out to be an absolute disaster. It's going to happen every so often. There's not a great deal you can do about it. All you can do is reference as thoroughly as possible. This is something that we do at Yellow, and we've actually stepped up our referencing even more recently, so we're making even more checks to maximise the chances of putting the right tenant in there. It's difficult because it means that it can take longer to find a tenant because you have people who fail referencing. We've had multiple cases of people failing referencing, so it's then taken longer to put something in, which means that it's costing the landlord money, but ultimately we know that it's far better to do that than to have something go wrong down the line. So ask your agent what checks they make. Make sure that you're happy with their answer, because it's one of those occasions when incentives aren't necessarily aligned. So you need to make sure that they're definitely acting in your best interest.
So number 4 on our list is kickbacks. So this is a problem all over the world, not just in property. The dreaded kickback, where somebody's just making a little bit of money on the side from a transaction they're involved in, but may not be telling you. Again, this is an exercise in trust. So how do you know you're not being fleeced on every job that comes along? Well, there are laws in place to prevent this, but it is really hard to police. And I think, again, you'll be surprised at how often this goes on.
It is really hard to police because most of the time you're not even aware this is happening. And when you are aware, most of the time it doesn't get to court. When it does, though, some really amazing things happen. So there's a case a couple of years back of an agency in London who charged a landlord £616 for changing a light fitting, which is pretty amazing. The landlord rightly complained, and when they looked into it, they found that the subcontractor had actually only charged £412, which still sounds like a hell of a lot. But nevertheless, the agency had marked it up by a couple of £100. So that's a heck of a markup, and when you think about how many maintenance jobs happen every year, somebody somewhere could be making a fortune out of this. So what can you do? Well, some agencies are upfront about marking up maintenance. So sometimes they'll charge you an arrangement fee for arranging maintenance jobs. So maybe it'll be 5 or 10% of the value of the job. I don't agree with that. I think a management fee should cover that anyway, so you shouldn't be having to charge anything extra. And it creates a bizarre incentive where the more that the contractor charges the landlord, the more the agency gets paid for it, which just sounds really backwards. You can, however, always ask to see original invoices. There is no reason why the agent should not show you the invoice from the tradesperson who did the job, so you can check that the amount that you're being charged hasn't been marked up at all. If they come up with some reason why they can't show you the invoice, it's just an excuse. You should always be able to see it. And also, it sounds weird, but I think it's a reason not to go with the very, very cheapest letting agent. You see some agencies advertising fees that just are not enough for them to run a profitable business. It's impossible. So if they're advertising that headline fee, the only way they can be making their business work is by charging you all kinds of extra fees, and marking up maintenance jobs could well be one of them. But that is just one of the imaginative fees that agencies come up with, and that leads us nicely on to another one.
It certainly does. Number 5 is renewals. Now, this hopefully isn't happening as much now, but there once was a time where agents would encourage a tenant to leave a property so they could charge a new fee to the landlord for a new tenant, and then charge that tenant a fee for moving into their next property. So they doubled up on their commission. A great win for the agents, but a big lose-lose for the landlord and for the tenant. Now, this was a pretty big thing 10 years ago, as crazy as that sounds, and the Office of Fair Trading won a victory over a very well-known and not very well-liked agent in London who had questionable practices in regard to this. And they weren't the only ones. There were quite a few at it. Now, because it's not as common anymore, doesn't mean it doesn't happen, so it's one to be aware of.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts, but it comes back to incentives again. We've seen this before, but the interests of the landlord and the interests of the agent are not exactly aligned. Now, Rob said that nowadays that doesn't happen so much, but something else that agents do to boost their profits instead is to charge renewal fees. So even if the same tenant stays on, they'll charge the tenant a fee for extending the tenancy, and they'll sometimes charge the landlord as well, just for fun. Seems pretty nuts because in the vast majority of renewals, there's very, very little work that actually needs to be done. It's just a way of making a bit more money. So this is something that we've just refused to do. It doesn't make any sense. Landlords want tenants to stay longer. Tenants, if they're happy in their home, want to stay on. Why should you discourage people from doing that? It makes no sense at all.
So number 6 on our list is upfront commission. Now, some agents will insist that all their commission is paid upfront. So the majority of letting agents will take it monthly. So they will take a fixed percentage every single month. But there are some agents out there who take an upfront fee. Now, it doesn't mean they are evil, but what it does mean is that you're at risk. Because the following example has played out a few times, unfortunately, where they get you a tenant and they find you a great tenant again, and this time this tenant is going to stay for 3 years. Lucky you. Wow, it's amazing how the upfront fee agency has found you a tenant who's willing to go for such a long tenancy agreement. So they put that tenant in, they move in, they collect their commission, and all is good. Except it's not, because they've put a nightmare tenant in, because their incentive is to find somebody who will go into a property for as long as possible, and therefore their judgment can be questioned when it comes to selecting their tenants. Are they picking the best tenants, or are they picking the tenants most likely to stay the longest? They are incentivized, unfortunately, to do the latter, to find tenants who are willing to stay the longest, which means sometimes, maybe not deliberately, but also sometimes absolutely deliberately, put a tenant in there that they know is just poor, that they know probably won't pay the rent, but they don't care because they've made their money from you up front.
And it can actually get worse than that as well. Not common, but we've heard of some agents who will charge a commission even when the property is empty. So there's a void, but they're still taking their management fee, which seems odd. And even some situations where the tenant, for some reason, will pay, say, 6 months up front. The agent will take that whole 6 months rent, hold on to it, and pay it over to the landlord month by month. The first time someone mentioned that to me, I couldn't believe it, and I thought it was just a one-off. But then someone else mentioned it, so apparently this is a thing. But it shouldn't be. It's your money. They shouldn't be holding on to it. So what can you do to protect yourself against this? Pretty straightforward. When you're talking to new agents, make sure that they charge you a percentage of the rent as it comes in. That's rent collected, not rent that's owed, but rent they've actually collected, and they pass it over to you as it comes in and not upfront. And be wary if they're trying to push tenants on you for extended periods of time. Most landlords like to go for an initial term of 6 or 12 months. 6 months in theory is the safest because it's quickest to get rid of them if they do turn out to be a nightmare, but I think 12 months is ideal if you're confident in the tenant, you've referenced them thoroughly, maybe you've got rent guarantee insurance. It means that you've got minimal downside, it gives the tenant some stability, and it means that you're not going to be incurring potentially more costs in just 6 months' time.
So there you have it. There's the 6 things that your agent may not be telling you. Like I said at the top of the show, pretty scary stuff. Now, luckily for all of us, dear listener, we've got the guy who literally wrote the book on this subject. So, Rob, those 6 things, while shocking to the vast majority of us, you know how to combat it. You know how to protect us and make sure that we can use a letting agent and actually have a great experience. So what tips and tricks could you give our listeners to make sure that they have a great experience?
Okay, so pretty easy checklist to run through. So first, are they regulated? We saw earlier that they don't have to be, but if they are regulated by ALA or one of the others, that is a definite tick in a box. Also, do they have client money protection? Again, they don't have to. Soon they will have to, but for now, make sure that's in place. Third, check that they're knowledgeable. Probe them a little bit. This is where it's really useful to have a working knowledge of the subject yourself, so you can ask good questions and get a sense for if they're just bluffing you or not. That's really useful because to be regulated, not every member of staff needs to have the qualification. So it's possible that the owner does, but the frontline staff don't have a clue what they're doing. So having the knowledge to ask some probing questions is very handy. Fourth, check how long they've been trading. If they are completely incompetent or it's just some kind of scam to protect the deposit money, that can only go on for so long. That's got a lifespan. If they've been trading for a few years or more, that's a good sign. And finally, check their terms and conditions. This is going to tell you about their fees, and it's also going to tell you about all the other ways in which they operate. If their terms and conditions are a single page or even nothing at all, that is not a good sign. The more information they give you, the better. It should give you a complete list of all the fees that they charge, so you can look out for the renewal fees and the other weird stuff they come up with. It should tell you when and how they take those fees. We've seen that that's important. And it should cover off everything else in their relationship with you and the tenant. Reading through all that isn't going to be the most fun thing that you do all week, but as we said earlier, Rob, this is important. This is an asset worth a lot of money, and it's an income stream worth a lot of money. And so spending a little bit of time to get the right agent in place is going to save you from all manner of headaches as time goes on.
It will. And we've talked about this before. If you're going to be hands-off, instead of doing all the running around, your upfront investment should be research. Researching the people that you want to work with or potentially may work with, researching the areas, researching every aspect of your property investment journey will put you in a much stronger position so that when you then go to being hands-off, you're not relying on trust alone. You've got hopefully some trust in there, but also backed up with knowledge and education. And that's what we try and get across here on the podcast is if we give you all the information, all the education, you'll be more confident investors. And I think it's important to say, we may have touched on it slightly throughout the episode, that there are great agents out there. You know, of course, we're going to say Yellow Lettings is one, but there are others too. You know, there are other great agents out there doing great things. So just do your research, because you may think they're great, but your research will just back that up for you. So review time now, and a huge thank you to this wonderful human being and hubber who's left us a 5-star review. And this week, it comes in from Tom. Funny, informative, and great tips. The Property Podcast has helped me find other podcasts and books that are helping me on my way to become a property investor. Not there yet, but heading in the right direction. Thanks, guys. And a quick one in from Alice who says, I love Rob and Rob, and I love these podcasts. They have a great style and are very informative. I would certainly recommend. Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Alice. Thank you so much for your reviews. We really do appreciate them.
Okay, that's us done for another week. I hope there's something useful in there that you can take away and apply to your own investing. You'll next hear from us with Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday. And in the meantime, if you'd like to hear what we get up to away from the podcast, you can go to thepropertyhub.net/discover to sign up for our next Discovery webinar. So one way or another, we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.